So welcome back, everyone, to the third and actually the last session of the Research Networking Day, Locating Sounds. That's the title of the next session. And I'd like to introduce the moderator of this session, Stas Shärifulla, who is a musician, researcher, and artist residing in Basel, in Switzerland. Their work explores the political dimensions of various musical and listening practices, employing live performances, lectures, interventions, and sound installations as vehicles to address issues such as extractivism, identity-based oppression, and collective memory, and also militant ethnography. For Stas, the intertwining of action and research is a fundamental aspect, and they are currently also guest teacher and guest lecturers at the Institute Art, Gender, Nature, associate researcher at the Critical Media Lab Basel, and also a guest lecturer at the master's program Sound Studies and Sonic Arts at Berlin University Arts here. So welcome on stage, Stas.
Thank you so much, Anita, for the introduction. And thank you for having all of us. Also, thanks to Tajsa Ryplansky, the co-curator of the discourse program. First of all, we will only have 2 participants in this section instead of 3, because the third participant, Maria Lopez, has withdrawn from the panel. So, so we're only 3 seats here. Nevertheless, I think it's, for me personally, of course, it's the most interesting concept, as we're gonna talk a lot about what is migration, what the process of migration that I'm currently experiencing right now, how does it work to talk about sound and sonic praxis outside the, let's put it the Western or the Western-centric framework, but also I hope that we will, I don't know, let's see, I hope that we'll talk a little bit at least about the very idea of locating, because locating sounds, the name of the panel, is also for me very, it's very Western framework for me. Thinking about something, some device that needs to locate in order to put it on a map, in order to have everything under control. So, and then for me, of course, coming from, and for all of us, for all 3 participants today, for 2 participants, and for me as a moderator, coming here to the far west, which is for me still feels very, very exotic, because coming to Europe, and I know that I'm exoticizing, like knights and castles and sausages and potato. So coming to the far west is a bit of a trauma, which we're still processing, I guess. And I talk too much, sorry. And we will have a first participant today. Thank you so very much for coming. This Aadita Chaudhury is a PhD candidate in Science and Technology Studies at York University, Canada. She's also a research assistant to the Sonic Street Technologies project at Goldsmiths, University of London. Welcome, Aadita.
Thank you, Stas, for the introduction, and thanks to CTM for inviting me. The story that I'm going to take you through today is actually something that is still unfolding, and I'm going to describe why, and you're going to figure out why. I come to the domain of sound studies, specifically learning about and researching Jamaican sound system cultures and the kinds of formations of sound systems that have become derived from Jamaican sound systems cultures from the field of science and technology studies, and my home within it, environmental STS and environmental humanities. And because of my orientation to this research, I am very sensitive to the way that migration influences sonic cultures and technoscientific knowledges, which is at the heart of this inquiry that I'm about to take you through. So when I got a fellowship to basically work on my own environmental humanities project in Edinburgh last year, at which point my employer at Goldsmiths, who runs the Sonic Street Technologies project, invited me to do a project that explores sound system culture in Scotland. And to do that, I first arrived upon this map, which shows the distribution of the major sound systems, not all of them, within the Scottish context. And as you can see, they're mostly in the border regions with England, so southern Scotland, and they're also concentrated in Edinburgh and the city of Glasgow. Messenger hi-fi that is Messenger sound system, actually, that is pictured here is the oldest sound system, the reggae sound system within Scotland, and it's been around since 1987, and it's been at the heart of what I explored and what I kind of found out about the ways that sound system culture is very uniquely situated in Scotland, because it actually aligns through various aspects of life and community, in that it is something that is considered part of family life, and something that could birth areas and events that are catered to community events that are all ages, but are also very deeply associated with activist centers as well. And I'm going to talk about all of this. I wanted to start off with kind of locating myself as part of this project. As I said, this is a view of the city of Edinburgh from Arthur's Seat, which is the remnant of an extinct volcano in the heart of Edinburgh. And you can see vast areas of Edinburgh from the top of it. And this is a really important site, and it's almost symbolic of what I'm going to take you through, because this site has in it archaeological histories that put the human history within Edinburgh back 7,000 years, with various Celtic and Gaelic tribes, as well as Roman influences and later Scottish and English tensions that kind of unfolded over this area over many, many thousands of years, and even more recent hundreds. So from then on, when I think about technoscientific legacies of sound system culture, specifically in the way that it relates to Black life in Scotland, it actually does not start with the histories of migration in the 20th century. It doesn't even start in the 19th century. When I first started thinking about Black technoscientific knowledges in the context of Scotland, I found out about John Edmonston, who is not a very well-known figure, but I really think he should be. He was someone who was born into slavery in Demerara in British Guyana in the late 18th century. And he was very influential to the history of natural history and biology and life sciences, and you'll find out in a second, is that he became a very proficient in taxidermy, so much so that after he gained emancipation, he relocated to Scotland and was given the position of an instructor at the Edinburgh Medical School, where he taught students taxidermy. And one of his most famous students, arguably the most famous one, was Charles Darwin. So this person basically instructed Charles Darwin's to collect specimens from various parts of the world and the voyage on the Beagle in order to preserve these specimens. How to do that through taxidermy came from the work of a formerly enslaved Black man called John Edmonston. And this is kind of symbolic, again, of the way that Black technoscientific knowledges and sonic ecologies remain embedded into the life of Edinburgh, its cityscapes, but they're not very visible unless you go looking for them. And it is with this background that I come to the study of sound systems. So I'm part of this project called the Sonic Street Technologies Project. And it is based out of the Goldsmiths University of London. It is funded by the European Research Council. And the aims of it is to map and situate what we're calling the technological diaspora of sound system cultures. When we're thinking about diasporic communities and diasporic knowledges, we often think about people and migration and cultures and cuisines and languages. we don't often think about technological forms. This is where the Sonic Streak Technologies project is trying to kind of subvert the way that we think about diasporas in general, in the way that the form of the sound systems, which originated in the 1950s in marginalized urban communities in the Caribbean, in particular in Jamaica, has made its way across the world and is now really thriving across various parts of Europe, thanks to the knowledges carried over through the Atlantic and through the migration of Caribbean people across Europe. So back to Scotland, this is a sound system gig that happened as part of Summerhall Festival, which is a rather prestigious arts and culture festival that happens in Edinburgh, situated at this historic venue called Summerhall. And here we have two of the most notable sound systems in Scotland, that is Mungo's Hi-Fi and Messenger Sound System, presenting a night that attracted basically all ages of people across various socioeconomic classes, throughout Scotland. And this was a really significant event because it shows the ways that while remaining embedded in grassroots activist sort of scenes and originating from those places, sound system culture has become quite respectable in the sense that it becomes the sort of community-funded event that has state recognition through councils and through the main arts organizations in Scotland. And this is one of the ways that sound system culture finds sort of resonance throughout Scotland and is proliferating further. I wanted to show you another video that shows this as well, but it's not really important. This is a still from a YouTube video where Messenger Sound System, which I mentioned, was celebrating the life of Josh Shaka, who is a sound system practitioner from London, who is probably one of the most famous sound system practitioners in the UK. He died past April, and this was a session that was put up at the Bongo Club in his honor in May 2023. So from here, so from here, I want to take you to the ways that sound system practice is revolutionizing and changing spaces within the city of Edinburgh. So I mentioned the Bongo Club, where there was this session that Messenger Sound System was doing, and it's a really interesting case study of what happens to Black music and sound system cultures and other forms of expression within the city of Edinburgh. So the Bongo Club has been around since 1994, but it has had many places within the city of Edinburgh. This particular location is interesting because it's right underneath the main Edinburgh City Library, which is connected to the vaults. If anybody knows about the vaults in the city of Edinburgh, they're very old and has a lot of histories of ghosts and marginalized urban communities that lived in them in the 19th century. And so this club, the Bongo Club, which runs as a non-for-profit organization, is located in this street called Cowshead, which is pretty much the clubbing street in Edinburgh. And this is where a lot of this practice takes place, which again gives it a sort of legitimacy within the urban life of Edinburgh, where it has become mainstream among university goers as well as other kinds of patrons. And that's how sound system culture is becoming kind of a household name throughout Scotland, but it still maintains its working class and activist roots, and in ways that I'll just show you very quickly. This is an event that's happening in the upcoming week on Friday that is fundraising for the Palestinian Medical Aid Society, Medical Emergency Aid for Palestinians, and this is headlined by Mungo's Hi-Fi, as well as other people that are playing reggae and roots music. And there's also a community sound system that has popped up in Govanhill, which is in the south side of Glasgow, that is really interesting because it's been showing up at climate protests. So in this way, the sound system as a form is becoming something that is oriented to entertaining family picnics and gatherings. There there was a sound system event that Mungo's Hi-Fi themselves did this past summer at a parish hall in Tranent, which is a pretty rural area outside of Edinburgh. And then they do things like climate marches and things. So it has a lot of function as a community entity. And that's what I kind of wanted to do, kind of wanted to showcase to you that it brings together and basically addresses community functions that may have not been adequately met by other activist and other sort of civil society organizations, but also provides a very sort of sonic influence to encourage people to gather and learn about whatever kind of issue that they are promoting at the time. And I kind of want to leave this discussion by talking about the way that, Black history in Scotland remains a contested site, especially after the 2020 George Floyd protests that also took place across cities in Scotland. There's been an ongoing sort of tension with the way that this particular site in Edinburgh is going to be memorialized. So this is the statue of Henry Dundas, who is often considered someone who delayed the process of formal legal abolition of slavery by a couple of decades by trying to enact a series of colonial reforms instead of advocating for complete and immediate abolition. So he was kind of someone who was kind of dilly-dallying with this a little bit and encouraged like gradual abolition instead of immediate ones. And so he becomes a very divisive figure. And it's become the site of like culture wars and other sorts of things that make people kind of question the role of Scotland in the context of the British Empire, while also remaining subject to, English oppression of Scottish lifeways through things like the highway clearings and other forms of cultural oppression. Sound system culture provides a gateway to explore these tensions through means outside of formal historical processes. And I think that it also has the potential to show different ways of solidarity being formed against empire and against the way that empire has mobilized to protect its interests. And I think in the present time, that's most evident in the way that Scotland has continued to give the UN agency that serves Palestinian refugees aid, while the rest of the UK has stopped doing that. And that's one of the sites that sound systems are gathering to fundraise around as well. So, and with that, I will end this provocation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this fantastic introduction to the body of your work. It's very unfortunate that we don't have much time, so you could just tell us more. Before we come to the other participant, I have a very short maybe question. So you were saying that one of your topics, like one of your main topics, is how exactly migration influences the sonic culture. But my question would be something like vice versa, the other way around. So did you have a chance to investigate how the sonic culture is influencing people, like migrant bodies who are coming to the very exact places where there's already like a very specific, situation sound-wise? Thank you.
I don't know if this is working. Okay, so I can attempt to answer that through one example, if I understood your question correctly. In one of the first sound system nights that I went to, and I think it was actually Messenger sound system that was playing in the Bongo Club. And there was somebody playing the Celtic flute over a sound system session, which was a really interesting thing to observe because in many ways, these places become sites where people are reappraising their histories of dispossession, of participating in colonialism, but also being subjected to oppression by the more dominant colonial force. So I think, in the sense of how do migrant bodies become affected by the sonic ecologies of a particular place, I think that's kind of an ongoing conversation in the context of Scotland, because the places where the sonic cultures are developing are very sort of syncretic but unpredictable places. And the people who are partaking in sound system cultures within Scotland are often not the descendants of Caribbean migrants, but are local university students, which includes some Caribbean migrants. But one of the things that we have observed as part of the Sonic Street Technologies project and other case studies throughout Europe is that most of the participants are actually white Europeans. And the people that are taking up sound system culture as a practice happen to be from various European countries at the moment.
So there is still a certain tension, right, between, I mean, the people who originally, let's say, brought this technology and and so maybe just a small sort of, because you mentioned sonic ecology, so I just know nothing about Scotland except of, all the myths and this Braveheart movie. And I just wonder, is it loud? Because I think I have this idea of Scotland being super loud. So if it is loud, or is it quiet? And if it is quiet, how just like local people react? Just like regular people, grannies, or I don't know, when it's been brought to the space like violently, because sound is also, really.
Oh, I mean, Scotland is sparsely inhabited in that it has less people as a whole country than the Greater Toronto Area, which is where I spent most of my life, which I find always fascinating that this entire country has less people. But because of the way that it's populated, it is a quieter space than a lot of other spaces. However, people don't seem to mind noise. There's the whole month of the Fringe Festival in August in Edinburgh where it's constantly loud. And that's kind of become the thing that Scotland is perhaps most famous for in the performing arts world. So there's a high tolerance for various kinds of sonic environments, including the very quiet ones. There's people doing a lot of eco-poetic work on, wild river swimming and the sound that the moss makes when the ice breaks and that sort of thing, which is very much up my alley.
Is it exotic for you as well when coming from, like, as I told you, very, very far to this country? And then, do you feel it as like you have an, I can explain. So I have this feeling sometimes that it's like a really thick glass I'm looking through, and I'm like, okay.
That's really interesting that you talked about whether it's something that's exotic for me. I actually find there's a really deep familiarity in the way that Scottish people think of themselves in relation to the land and my home culture. I'm Bengali, and the nation state that I was born in was India, but we're actually one people divided between India and Bangladesh, and we're also some people that are very, enchanted by rivers and birds and poetry and like the changing of the seasons, and that's why one of the, most famous poets from Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore, was called the Bard of Bengal by a bunch of people from the Robert Burns Society in Scotland about like 100 years ago. So there's kinship, and then there's difference. And I think there's, I don't necessarily feel exotic, but there's like this underlying familiarity of like what it feels like to be unwilling stooges of empire while also being subjugated by empire, which is, I think, something that, to various degrees, the Bengali people and the Scottish people share.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for this extended round of questions. I was
good.
just really curious. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
And we are heading next to our second participant of this section. Very proud to present all of you Julianne Chua, who is a Singapore-born, Berlin-based artist, writer, and researcher interested in transversal affinities across diasporas. Julianne is a graduate student and student assistant at Humboldt Universität zu Berlin. Please welcome.
it's funny, I will be talking about beeps. So let's try this. So thank you, Stas, for the introduction, Anita, Valeria, and the entire CTM team for organizing this Research Networking Day, and also yesterday's activities. I'm Julianne Chua, a graduate student at Humboldt, and today I'm going to present an ongoing artistic research project titled Mother Tongues, which is a participatory countermapping project that explores the issues of language and diaspora in Berlin's interstitial spaces by invoking collective listening and field recordings as everyday tactics to reimagine and speculate post-migrant futurities. In Singapore, where I grew up, it's common to see signs translated into 4 official languages: English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. And of course, these are not the only languages and dialects that we have. There are also speakers of Bengali, Hokkien, like my family, and Urdu, and even Armenian. So this also applies to train announcements. I hope this works. Yeah.
Botanic Gardens Interchange. 植物园 Kebun Bunga. Po Malay. Please mind the gap. 请小心空隙 Berhati-hati di ruang platform. தயவு செய்து தள மேடை இடைவெளியை கவனத்தில் கொள்ளுங்கள். Next station.
In Berlin, it's common to have signs and announcements in 2 languages, German and English. Halten Sie sich bitte während der Fahrt fest. Hold on tight during the ride. Lass mich bitte offen. Leave me open, please. Lass mich bitte offen. Despite the fact that Berlin's diasporic population is much more diverse than its English-speaking communities, languages such as Turkish, Arabic, and Vietnamese are overheard on the streets, but unheard on official channels. Can the subaltern be heard and felt? Here I am reformulating Gayatri Spivak's phraseology, Can the Subaltern Speak? And Nikita Dalwan's Can the Subaltern Speak German? And Munoz's, so Jose Esteban Munoz's, How does the subaltern feel? And how might subalterns feel each other? The French anthropologist Marc Auger has referred to spaces of transience, such as the metro, as non-places where human beings remain anonymous. But what if ontology is displaced or denied, or when one's presence is subjected to hypersurveillance? And I have a quote on screen from the article Feeling Brown, Feeling Down, which I would recommend for further reading if you are interested. And reading Munoz in conjunction with an excerpt from Ame Kangise's article, A Sonic Geography of Voice Towards an Effective Politics, I asked the question, how do our voices reproduce existing power relations in society? And I think this is also keeping in mind some of the earlier conversations that we've had with archives and AI, for example. And as Aline mentioned, unlearning biases and possibly exploring indigenous created AI. And when I look at this particular quote, one thing that stands out to me is the word capture. And we capture things in words, we capture an image, we capture prisoners of war. And Said, in the article Reflections on Exile, has referred to the term apprehension, and has also written about the violence of apprehension, but also apprehension as pleasurable. And I will quote one fragment of this article. So seeing the entire world as a foreign land makes possible originality of vision. Most people are principally aware of one culture, one setting, one home. Exiles are aware of at least two or more. And this plurality of vision gives rise to an awareness of simultaneous dimensions, an awareness that, to borrow a phrase from music, is contrapuntal, unquote. And on screen, I visually referenced two films, a feature and a documentary, Angstens Ziele auf from Fassbinder, in which Ali's bad German is one aspect that articulates his difference, and Philip Schaffner's The Half Moon Files, which we also discussed yesterday, which is a project of recording the world's languages on shellac with World War I prisoners of war who were willing or unwilling participants in this colonial project. I turned to Tina M. Kempt, who in her text, Image Matters, discusses hapticity and tactility of the image. And I wonder how this transposes onto the audiovisual media. What kind of vibrations are transmitted? I mean, in this image also, like, if you look at the positions of the hands, I think that's quite interesting. But we can also study it, I think, from the gazes that are produced by those that are in the group and outside of the group. And I think re-looking at this image yesterday, I also noticed that there is someone peeking in through the window. And when thinking through like looks and stares, do they come from a place of curiosity or hostility? As part of this artistic research, I kept my ears open to artists who explore public spaces and their palimpsestic, polyphonous layering of languages. While attending a symposium in New York, I came across Emeka Okpo's installation at MoMA, which I felt resonated with these ideas of listening as a form of activism and field recordings as an act of archival practice, and started to think about the notion of sonic borderlessness and how sounds transport us. How are you a Berliner and how are you a Lagosian? Obo asks and is asked. Shuttling between two places, your brain has to do the switch. And that fusion of two places started occurring to me. Obo explores the intersecting points between two cities through an 18-channel sound installation, imagining Lagerstraße as a fictive place, yet infusing it with realities, pointing towards the importance of active listening, plugging into our surroundings, plugging out from our podcasts and playlists, and plugging into our environment. Like Obo, I was interested in complicating Berlin's oral textures. Mother Tongues is an ongoing participatory project that invites people to contribute their own few recordings from their points of origin or places they call home.
Numaralı çıkış kapısından yolcu alımına hazırdır. Yolcuların çıkış kapısında uçağa gelmeleri rica olunur. Attention please. Pegasus Airlines. Flight number PC 9772.
Ya çok saçma be. Hayır okuyamayacağım. Ya neyse okuyayım. Yaşam mı bu ya? Yasam. Yasam mı? Yasam mıydı?
Since 2000, although cities speak in beeps and codified scripts that shape and modify our wordless gestures, the conscious inclusion of ordinary language and overheard conversations blurs the boundaries between private and public spheres, tracing quiet moments of intimacy as they meld with omnipresent and dominant state apparatuses. Amplifying a plurality of marginalized voices functions as a means of subverting colonial and heteropatriarchal structures embedded within dominant cultures and sustaining strategies of survival. Where does sound diverge and converge? When does it turn concordant or dissonant? As the voices interact, listeners are invited to locate echoes, resonances, gaps, and omissions within polyvocality in an attempt to resolve tensions between language, citizenship, and senses of belonging. Mother Tongue speculates post-migrant futurities and imagines queer feminist possibilities for Berlin's urban forms, architectural idioms, and linguistic infrastructures, thereby unfolding new directions.
Trenimiz peron sonunda duracaktır. Sayın yolcularımız, lütfen inen yolculara öncelik veriniz. The next train service to Gebze is arriving at platform 2, 10, Cars train. The train will stop at Edinburgh. Dear passengers, please give priority to landing passengers.
Şimdi karşıya geçebilirsiniz. 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 5 3 1
Hoş geldin. Hoş bulduk.
O kadar. Belki bir kardandan yaparız sonra.
No, 1 second. So since I'm just about to wrap up, but since 2022, this work has been through several iterations, and it's been workshopped through monthly meetings as part of really revolving around the topic of counter archives and potential histories. And these workshops were translated into an exhibition that took place at a former car park, which is also an interstitial space at Kunstraum Potsdamer Straße. And now it's also finding a home on community radio. I did a show with Ipek, who curated the exhibition, and interviewed her on her project on Tea Sugar Dream, which was done in collaboration with one of the oldest women's immigrant associations in Berlin, the Türkische Frauenverein, which has been around since the 70s. And also happy to announce a new residency at Oroco Radio with my friend Anna, who is here today, where we are looking to, I guess, further explore forms of belonging across Afro-Asian diasporas. And these are my sources. I can also email them to you if you like. Just approach me after the panel. And of course, since it's a participatory project, it's an open call, and you're also welcome to participate in it as you wish. And I think this last version that I showed today also went through a shift after our visit to the Loud Archive, the Sound Archive yesterday. And I was thinking a lot about what Mariana was discussing about closed captioning, or the lack of, in my work, since it's a video work. So I also use these two new colored dots, which I appropriated from the Sound Archive, where the red dots are even shellac records with the slightest damage, and the yellow ones are the ones that are missing. So I sort of intersperse them throughout the video, but I also, I guess, am commenting on the missing in terms of accessibility, like how I can improve this work. And I'm also open to your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can you please? Thank you for sharing your. Yes, you wish. Thank you for sharing your amazing work. It's really something. I wanted to just start with a maybe slightly personal question, so I'm really sorry in advance. So you mentioned listening as activism, right? And speaking from the positionality of artist/researcher, which is really interesting. But what is listening as activism, speaking of the positionality of you as a person, as a woman experiencing migration currently, if you could elaborate, maybe some examples.
That's two layers to that question. But I suppose, to me, I view activism as a way of, and I think other speakers have mentioned this before, but activating our senses and engaging them. And that idea of what we tune in and what we tune out in our communities or outside of our communities. And I suppose an example from my context, my location.
No, it's okay.
I can give an example. Okay, I think this is kind of connected to what Aadita was sharing earlier, because the one connection between Scotland and Singapore, where I'm from, is that the British colonized us, but in a way we are also arguably junior partners in the colonial project. But part of that process was a lot of language loss, right? So, besides the 4 languages that I shared earlier, Hokkien, which is one of the maybe 9 languages that my grandmother speaks, has been has experienced what I guess people term language death, or is slowly, trickling down through the generations, because of on the political level, this effort by the government or state to ban languages. So Hokkien was banned on radio for a long time, and on TV as well. So there isn't a lot of resource, even as someone who understands Hokkien, but never formally learned it because it was never taught in school. How can I access, this language that is also not written, right? And I think there are, companies like Meta that are looking into speech-to-speech translations now. But I guess a personal connection for me also is the challenges of communicating with my grandmother, or communicating in embodied ways, I guess, when the verbal, wasn't sufficient. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I also wanted to. So you had the reference to, as far as I understood, it was Gayatri Spivak, this Can the Subaltern Speak kind of classic text. And I thought that it's very interesting how, again, excuse me in advance, how gendered your research is, because usually people dealing with what is called like militant research, the approach, I mean, most of the people I work with is quite straightforward. It's really straightforward. I also respect it. So I go to the institution, I just grab money from the institution, I channel this money to my community, I pretend this is an artwork. So just to, you know, lie to rich white people in Europe, especially in Switzerland, it's a really good choice. Yes. And then I constantly see people being, being very critical when it's going to like a slightly different approach, slightly more like, let's say, feminine approach to the things, saying that, yeah, okay, so we have different senses. It's not only about like creating new infrastructures and channeling money. It's also about if we speak decolonial, right? If we use such word as decolonization, it's also not entirely just the land-back situation. It's also the way we think. It's also the way we speak. And yeah, so sorry, it was a really long question. the question is just super simple. So Gayatri Spivak was, you know, as well, was highly criticized for just being like an academic person sitting in the office while not doing anything. And how are you dealing with this dichotomy, sort of being an activist and an artist/researcher at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Where to begin? I mean, we are also, are we complicit? I don't know, I'm speaking from, like institutional affiliations, but I think all of us are in some way here. But yeah, I guess, I mean, what you mentioned first with the militant research, I'm not very familiar with that, but the way that you described it made sense to me, because I think, I mean, Ami Kangiza also, I listened to one podcast where they describe like, you know, applying for, you know, these fundings and getting the resources, like, let's say it's like field recording instruments, right? And then accidentally leaving it behind in the place where it's like far away from where it was sourced. But so that, you know, someone who might not be in a position to purchase such equipment has the means to use that tool right now. And I think that inspires me a lot, like that thinking. I'm not sure if I'm fully doing it, but I would like to explore that, yeah. But the question, I guess, also about decolonizing our tongues.
Yeah, I'm just really wondering that if it's possible. I mean, I really like the presentation. I think it's amazing, especially what you said about the languages. Mm-hmm. That there are a lot of people speak in Arabic, a lot of people speak in Turkish. I mean, I constantly hear it in the streets as well. But for them, this space is just not, you know, this is not prepared. So I just wonder, like, if it's possible to, if not just going straight political, you know, just going to the Senate or how is it called here, and say like, come on, but maybe use some artistic tools.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of simple interventions that are powerful. I haven't done it in this language context, but I'm plotting now. But I have done interventions in supermarkets, for example, where, you know, it is also very imbricated in colonial power relations, still and extractivist economies. But what I did was, so there's an Asian, usually, right, there's an ASEAN of fine cost, or what else do they call it, Mediterranean or Mexican section of the supermarket. And yes, on the one hand, I gravitate towards that space because I want to check out what's there and how much it costs. But at the same time, I look at it quite critically because how does pasta, for example, which is Italian, exist next to the, Spätzle, yeah, for example. But egg noodles are, kind of put aside, right? Or are they isolated, or does this mean that access is, like it's easier to access or find such a product? So what I did was I would take objects that are from these sections, the excluded sections of the supermarket, and place them elsewhere in the supermarket where I think that they might belong. So like kimchi next to the sauerkraut is something I've done. And it's a very simple act, right? And you can do it too. Like the next time you go to the supermarket, whatever, also from your location and your positionality. But yeah, I find that kind of like playful way of upsetting the system, maybe, or this unsettling it in some way that is not so harmful, or yeah.
It's funny that food is always like a conversation starter, because we had just had a talk with Taisa Ryplansky, who's the co-curator of the discourse program, and about the very specific spices that she has at home, and then they had an argue whether they should just put it like group them, like okay, this is Asian, this is something like that, or put it alphabetically. I mean, alphabetically one, but yeah. Okay.
I know someone who alphabetically categorizes.
But this is a tough choice,
spices.
right? This is a very tough choice. Like, but yeah, I would.
Same with archives, but yes.
But this is kind of the same with the doing. Okay, so cabbage goes to cabbage. Yeah, this is okay. Thank you so much again. Can we please have you, Aadita, as well? And while you're thinking about, we have some time for the questions, right? Okay, that's great. And so while you're all thinking about, considering about asking our dear participants something, I would just have a really small, sort of more like a comment than a question, but also if you got something to add, that would be awesome. So what I really like in both of your works, in both of your like research, the way you do it, is that it's really about the power dynamics, in the sense that how to say it. So you come to the places that usually used to exoticize people like you, people like me, like other people with the experience in migration. And then we are kind of doing the same, but the other way around. So, okay, like I'm coming from India, let's see how your Scottish people work with this stuff. So, yeah, okay, I'm coming from Singapore, let's see how you Germans organize the public systems and so on. And so I also thought that the sort of a feature that, because the European mind is like really, I go and deconstruct. I deconstruct, I dissect, I want to see what it consists of. But then for both of your works, for me at least personally, it's not a deconstruction, it's rather a reconstruction. So saying that, yeah, okay, so the other point of view is also like valid, like legible, it's here. So yeah, I was just wondering, it's kind of a stupid question maybe, I was just wondering if you have something to say, to add, so if you see your practice in such way, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can start, but yeah, the first thing that I guess I connected with was this line that you said, like, we are here. And I think Said also uses it in that essay that I referenced, Reflections on Exile. But, what we think of the foreign or the other has been around for a long time, right? Like, 18th century, for example, speaking in Berlin's context, if you go to like the Friedrichshain, like Kreuzberg Museum, like you have all these archival materials of people that came as university students or as language teachers. And then of course there are also like, the darker histories of like human zoos or welfare expositions in the UK, but also other places. But I also wanted to kind of counter what you said in some way, because I mean, when I studied Asian studies, I think when, the Portuguese landed in the southeast coast of China, they also described them as barbarians. I mean, the Chinese people were describing the foreigners coming in as barbarians or savages, and as smelly, or there are all these terms, but it's so you find all these patterns in so many literatures and the stories that we tell, and how can we tell them differently, I guess is a question that I wonder. And that this inhabiting two or more worlds is often seen as a bad thing, maybe, but it, in a sense, it can be seen as an advantage because you're able to see beyond just the dominant lens, right? Those are my initial thoughts.
I kind of always take comfort in aligning myself with deep time histories and more than human ecologies when trying to really orient myself as a researcher or just like a human living as a migrant. And I find that really effective in my practice in Scotland, because I was doing this research on sound systems, but I was also partaking in my own sort of environmental humanities research, where I did a lot of field recordings in various sites across Scotland, in Edinburgh, which speak to the more than human histories and the very long history of the volcanic eruptions, and how land was formed and how the glaciers happened and those kinds of things. You find affinities with the more than human world, and you find alliances there where, in the large scheme of things, in that temporal scale, the history of transatlantic slavery, of colonization in the last 500 years, of extraction becomes such a small thing that you're able to orient to other spatialities and temporalities where you actually have more allies in the vast scheme of history than the present temporal moment. And that's a comforting thought. But in that sense, the tensions exist. And my friend, who's a Métis anthropologist, Zoe Todd, actually was educated in the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, and her work is on fish and colonialism in what is now Canada. But at one of her talks, she made this sort of links between the myth of Nessie and the Loch Ness Monster and the fish of the prairie fish of what is now Canada, and perhaps the lake sturgeon that is currently in Alberta is someone that got out of Loch Ness and swam across the Atlantic and ended up in Alberta. I find that these sort of counter mythologies of relating to what has been termed the other, and the dichotomy of the worlds that we live in, where there's the colonized and the colonizers, and that the colonized go on to further frontiers of colonization, which is what is happening in my birth country of India, where there's new frontiers of border nationalism and subjugation, which is how they consider that's the idea of state formation that they have inherited from Europe, and that's what they're kind of intensifying. Whenever I feel kind of depressed about that from an ecological point of view or from a cultural point of view, I just attune to longer histories of deep time and the ways that all of this can be undone in a second.
I was reminded as you were speaking about, I guess one reason why I gravitate towards, the Turkish Women's Association, even though I'm not Turkish, I speak the language, but I'm not Turkish, is because of these histories, of the being able to turn to people who have paved some paths, and made some things easier. That's on the one hand, and then also, recently in the past week, I've also been reading this graphic anthology that's called Displace. It's a THIS space place, but 150 years retold. But it's also like a pun, I guess, on a wordplay on displacement. Looking to indigenous writing and indigenous futurism to understand, better relationships with the land and interspecies relationships, but also this idea that time is not linear and that we have, past, present, and future all within us, right? I think some others have references. And also that progress can mean something different. Like progress does not have to mean expanding into frontiers or colonizing Mars or in very destructive ways, right? Like progress, I think in this text especially, progress is viewed quite differently,
Thank you for bringing that up, because that kind of reminds me of the work of Michelle Bastien, who was my mentor while I was at the University of Edinburgh. And she's an environmental humanities scholar who thinks about critical time studies and specifically the way that timekeeping practices have dominated Western discourse and global discourse in the last 100 years of standardizing the clocks and all of these things and how that has been cemented and naturalized to the extent where we're actually not aligning ourselves or not really noticing the real temporalities that exist all around us in the form of phenology, which is the study of the change of the seasons and how that affects biological and ecosystem sort of relations. And she has this really great paper where she talks about when we're thinking about the climate crisis and using terms if we don't curb the emissions in 8 years, this is the amount of global average temperature rise that we can expect to see. And while that is helpful, that sort of framing of urgency is helpful in certain ways, it also kind of disconnects us to the fact that the world itself does not run on linear clock time. And that there are multiple future possibilities that are embedded in us now, and what would it mean to engage with those possibilities. And there's Black Quantum Futurism, which is an art collective and a theory collective that also talk about that, that linear time is kind of screwing us over in imagining non-doomsday possibilities, and who has a lot to gain from that. And I think that's another thing, is that if we are following and if we're very committed to the realness of linear time in a way that is kept by a clock, we are also robbing ourselves of other futures.
Yeah, thank you. It's exactly what I meant by the reconstruction. So instead of weaponizing your identity, making it a token to whatever, sell it better to some people, you just acknowledge the fact that, okay, there are different other points of view, right? Different other opinions. The damage is done. You can't undo the damage, but bring in even more damage. So it's not, you can't heal trauma by causing even more trauma. So it's just not the way it works. And and we are living in the 2024. I would love riding a horse. I would love to come to Berlin by horse, but I don't believe it's possible. And there's trains as well, even if it's Deutsche Bahn. Or maybe it's a good option. Okay, so we are doing good without your questions, as you see. But yeah, we would really, really love to hear something. If there's any, please don't hesitate. Please.
Hi, thank you both so much for your presentations. Because Julianne, you brought up the terms of capture and counter-archiving, I would love to hear from both of you about some of your considerations and methods around how you collect, store, and present your research.
yeah, I guess I have a few thoughts about that, and I'm kind of trying to locate them. I mean, maybe to start off, I work as a clipper. Like, it's an odd term, but like basically like the person that might select the clips for the trailers that you see on Netflix when you hover over a film or TV, and also an editor. And I think working on this project, I was very mindful of the ethical aspect of it, to not misrepresent or to not also participate in these extractive practices. And I think my current solution around that is to, sort of diffuse power by decentralizing authorship, and by workshopping is one example, making it collaborative, and also engaging in feedback loops so that it's not just, I mean, yes, I am the one putting it together, and I am the one archiving it and naming files, or, but at the same time, I think getting other people on board and listening to them, to their opinions, and taking them in, I think that's my approach to it right now. Yeah.
So there's the way that I can talk about my own practice is something that overlaps with the project that I'm part of and my own sort of ethical orientation to all of these things. So the Sonic Street Technologies project is very like explicitly committed to non-extractive methodologies of research, and also legitimizing practices research as like a real form of academic inquiry. So in that context, in the various sites that the project has been involved in, there's been always somebody who is a practitioner of sound system culture, who's on the ground, who is leading the research for the community, and is also compensated for it, and is considered part of the research group, and is credited if they are producing anything that is, audiovisual material. We've also sponsored a bunch of films that, produced a bunch of films that are accredited to the original creators and things like that. And have also sponsored events and dances and sessions. So that's one of the ways that the European Union money is getting funneled to places like the Caribbean, Colombia, Mexico, as well as various other places in Europe and Asia. However, I'm just one employee of that project. I'm just one participant in that project, and that has its own sort of ecosystem of ethics that is ongoingly negotiated. In my work, I'm really orienting to public space when I'm looking at sound research. And I would also include that as public space when I am looking at more than human sound research. If I'm at a park or a sort of natural area, I'm not going into people's enclosures and things like that. And I think there has to be ongoing sensitivity and relational negotiation between you and even the more than human actors that you're dealing with, where you cannot objectify and sort of see as static the emerging relationship between you and the place. So you might have consent from the parties that you are, including in part of your field recordings, and the vibe might be off another time, and at which point you have to stop. Mm-hmm. So it is really, just being mindful of ongoing consensual relationships to people and places, even if they are, public in the legal framework.
Thank you so much for your question. Amazing question. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Hey. Thanks for your talks, really good. I was just really interested in talking about time and different temporalities of time. For me, my favorite is, I'm a little bit biased as a disabled person, but is crip time. But I was wondering how you sort of explore your own situated experiences of time and bring that into your own work or into your own research. And yeah, I don't know, go off that, I guess.
I've only been in Berlin for like 8 days now, and I have been thinking a lot about jet lag temporalities and what it means to be a person in a new place and representing yourself. Like, is there an ideal self in relation to the way that I'm experiencing time and temporality and what that's doing to me physiologically? And I've not been 100% myself because of the way that my body is still organizing itself to the temporal arrangements in the city of Berlin and its speed. Because even like apart from the jet lag, I've been living in rural West Bengal for the last like 4 months. And my relationships with automated systems of transportation and things like that have been rather limited. So I do feel that like at present, this is something that I can speak to because I literally came from another world with a very different level of development. I do have internet access, so that helps, but this is something that I constantly have to also think about at an identity level because I do move at a slower pace. And that is my preference as someone who has been subjected to rural livelihoods for the better part of the last year. And how that impacts the way that I do work within academic settings and the cultures of productivity and hustle culture and how that has impacted my like embodiment is something that I've had to come face to face with because of like stress-related disorders and things like that. And yeah, I'm kind of just like working with the politics of refusal, of like work refusal, and ongoing movements about how much like workers' rights and things like that, which I think are very important in getting to temporal liberation for all.
I'm gonna take a dark turn, maybe, I don't know. But I was very moved by the work on the Parkinson's video that we watched earlier today. And also reminded of, so when I was 8, I was hospitalized for a long time. I realized that when I saw like, the national flag fly by on a helicopter, and realizing, oh, it's National Day, but I'm still in hospital. And because of that, it affected like school. Physically, I'm well now, but like I think it has also, I think at some point made me, I think when I was young, made me realize that I must make the most out of my time. I think there was this like sense that, I survived for a reason, and there was a whole thing. But then also in the last year, I lost 2 grandparents. And I think when deaths happen, and we don't talk about death enough, I think in some cultures, not all, but how do we realize or grapple with like also our limited time, like here on this planet at least, that's it.
Thank you so much for your question. It's another great question. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for your panel. I would love to explore further the idea of consent of places and people when recording, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the political aspect of field recordings. What I mean is like when we're talking about field recordings are usually presented as like eco-friendly form of like sound art, because you're not like taking an object, you're just taking a copy of a soundscape. But at the same time, there should be an operator, someone like a body that presses the record button, and when it comes to states, it means like somebody was let in the country or somebody had to be there. For example, I was invited to participate in a project where people from Russia do field recordings, to mourn with Ukrainian people for like the anniversary of full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And the list of participants is like, their geographical points are very, very sparse. Like, I'm in Germany, there's a person in Sweden, there's a person also in Armenia and Georgia, and like, I was thinking about how we were let in these countries, or we like had to flee, and like we even had like a privilege to get a visa and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that's my question. What do you think about this aspect of field recording?
I guess that's a question for me. I guess this project actually emerged out of a course that was titled Mapping Berlin Geography of Sound. And yes, mapping and geography are both contested terms. But we looked at different field recording artists, including Peter Cusack and Christina Kubish, for example. And I think one work that maybe lingered in my mind was, for Cusack, it was, this question of like, what is your favorite sound? But also sounds of dangerous places, right? But to have a project that has different iterations across, cities and time. And I think for Kubish, my takeaway was, I don't know the title of this work, maybe you know this, but the one where she had these headphones that were recording, but moving close to for example, the ATMs, right? And the sounds that were, produced through that process. And I think one, or at least my approach to field recording is how can we, in the way that Kubish kind of used it to, amplify the capitalist, like, machines that are embedded and imbricated within our everyday lives. I think for me, it's also to surface a lack, right? Or what hasn't been recorded or has been erased, or I have more thoughts on that, but I don't know if we have time. Yeah.
Maybe you have anything to comment? Field recordings.
Well, if we're talking about consent, as much as we want to be very aware of the consent of the people that we're working with, the communities and the places, we also have to look to ourselves to see what do I consent to, and what do I want to make part of the research outcomes. I have a series of field recordings of a very particular place that is a public place in Edinburgh, which is called Ravelston Woods. And it's really interesting for me because it's one of the very few locations in Edinburgh that has sedimentary rock formations, not igneous ones that are from the volcanic eruption. And there's these vast sort of like limestone quarries in this park, and it's quite isolated, but these limestones were like kind of mined for some of the first buildings in the city of Edinburgh, going back hundreds of years. And there's also like some very rare birds that are only endemic to Scotland that like live there and all of this. And I would spend a lot of time there like taking photographs and things like that, but I didn't feel right for me to do anything with the field recordings of sound that I did there, because it was about my relationship to that place. And I didn't consent to having that being removed from that context to be part of something else. Did it inform my orientation to research and how I realized like that park itself was the sort of temporal collapsed microcosm of all the different histories within Edinburgh, of like prehistory to histories of settlements to modern life, because you can see that, like you can hear the highway from that park, as well as like various endangered fauna. But yeah, I didn't consent to that field recording being made public for anything other than like my own sort of forming relationships with that place. So I think that's also something to know. Amar Kangieser, in a talk that they gave at CTM a few years ago, was asked something similar about like the ethics of field recording. And this is something obviously informed by the experiences that are stored in your body and your own sort of orientation to place and form of embodiment. But they were talking about like at some point you just know you have a relationship to the place where you're like, you're not supposed to do a field recording right now. And maybe you're supposed to do a field recording, but that doesn't go out into the world. And that's something that is part of a felt experience that cannot be quantified and qualified under a particular domain of objectivity that wants consistent. Critical distance. A consistent sort of operation within the research context, and that's not always possible.
Thank you for your question, and thank you so much for your comments. I guess we're unfortunately don't have time for more questions, but if you have any, you can please approach our amazing participants. Thank you, Aadita. Thank you, Julianne.